Hello everyone, and welcome to day 1.4 of my Zero to Hero series for the Elder Scrolls Online. Day 1.4 is going to describe how to conceptualize a gear loadout in ESO, and then how to farm the gear after. A quick caveat before we go too deep. Farming gear early on is about enjoying your character at their current stage in the game. I don't recommend it as the fastest or most efficient way to develop your character. The fastest way to develop your character was discussed in day 1.0 and can be summarized as progressing the main quest being your number one priority, while also completing zone quests for skill points and gathering lore books and sky shards along the way. Creating a loadout and farming gear are important for experiencing aspects of the game outside of the main quest and the zone quests. Without appropriate gear, doing dungeons and PvPing is substantially more difficult. This guide therefore exists to help new players expand into those areas of content and have a more well-rounded experience of the game. Before creating a gear loadout, there's some behind-the-scenes knowledge that we need to discuss. An effective build in ESO is all about maximizing the stats you want. In order to do this, we have 12 gear slots which can be used to create set bonuses. Most typical sets have 2 through 5 set piece bonuses, with the 5 piece bonus typically being a unique and powerful bonus. The number of bonuses your character receives is based on the number of pieces of that gear set that you are wearing. So a 2-piece bonus is unlocked at 2 pieces worn of that gear set, a 3-piece bonus at 3 pieces, and so on until you have 5 pieces and all of the bonuses unlocked. It is worth noting that you can't double up on the bonuses of a single set by wearing 10 pieces of that particular set. Any piece worn beyond 5 will not contribute value towards a set bonus. There are some sets that have a 1-piece set bonus and some with only a single powerful 2-piece set bonus. But these sets usually require being at least champ level 160 and completing some form of difficult content, so they're pretty out of scope for a video in the day 1 portion of the series. They're still worth noting, as later into the game, a common build will involve 2 5-piece sets and one of these 2-piece sets, so that each of the 12 available gear slots adds optimal value. As far as stats are concerned, we will need to cover what stats are good for what builds and how to optimize stats, especially regarding the armor type we want to wear the most of and level the quickest. We will talk about how to look up sets online, how to recognize a set as attainable or unattainable at our level, and how to tell if a set is desirable for our build and which gear slots should be filled by what pieces of a set. Lastly, we'll talk about the various Mundus stones and foods and which ones to use for which builds. Of the 12 slots your character has for placing gear, 7 are body slots, 3 are jewelry slots, and then 2 are weapon slots. The art of making a character build has to do with how best to fill those 12 item slots in order to maximize the stats of your character. Without stats, any character is weak, and so creating a build maximizing the desired stats of a character goes a long way. There are several important things to consider when evaluating how a piece of gear will perform. Priority number 1 is the set bonus of the gear. A valuable set bonus can outweigh many other factors considered when making a build. Second item to consider is the level of the piece of gear. If a piece of gear is drastically lower level than your character level, then the combat effectiveness of the piece is greatly diminished. This is due to ESO's scaling system, which tries to make lower level characters as effective as high level characters as long as their character level is proportional to their gear level. Thirdly, the enchantment on the armor, as this is a good source of the 3 primary stats, health, magicka, or stamina. The next point to consider is the trait associated with a piece of armor. Armor traits have different values depending on character builds, and some traits may be more valuable than others. My priority for traits is displayed on screen now. Feel free to pause to consider what traits to prioritize for your build. The last consideration for body pieces when developing a build is which armor pieces have the highest contribution to character resistances. In ESO, the order of priority goes chest pieces, followed by heads, shoulders, legs, and feet pieces, followed by hand pieces, and lastly, waist pieces. What this means is that whenever possible, heavier pieces of armor should be placed on the chest, and the lighter pieces should be placed on the waist. This consideration is of extremely low priority and shouldn't be considered a deal breaker if it can't be followed. It's just nice to know. For instance, I would never give up a set bonus in order to run a random heavy chest. The set bonus will far outweigh the small resistance bonus from having a heavy chest. With regards to jewelry, there are a few considerations. The set bonus being the most important, followed by the jewelry enchantment, as these can be good sources of otherwise hard to attain stats, and lastly, the trait, as all sets will drop with one of three traits: healthy, robust, or arcane. Healthy trait will increase maximum health, robust trait will increase maximum stamina, and arcane trait will increase maximum magicka. These traits typically create the foundation for the type of armor enchantments you will want. For instance, a character running healthy jewelry may not need any health enchants on their armor, or need health as a component of their food buff. Weapons in ESO provide two set bonuses, as you can have a main hand weapon and an offhand weapon. Two-handed weapons and staves both provide 2 pieces towards a set bonus, which is very necessary in some cases to complete a 5-piece set. Considerations for weapons are firstly the set bonus, secondly the gear level. It's worth noting it's a lot more important that weapon levels stay close to your character level, as weapon levels have a really high impact on your overall damage, and so if your weapon level is falling far behind your character level, it will really start to show in the amount of damage you can do. The next consideration is the weapon trait, as certain weapon traits can have a very high impact on your build, whereas some are borderline inconsequential. The last consideration is the enchantment of a weapon. Early on, most enchantments are high impact, and so having a specific enchantment does not raise or lower your combat effectiveness by too much. There are some that are better than others, but it isn't something to split hairs about. Now that we've talked about gear and the different gear slots and the considerations to make when allocating gear to a specific position, let's talk about the kind of stats that will improve your character's effectiveness regarding the role they are trying to fill. For Magicka DPS, the primary stats are going to be spell damage, max magicka, spell crit, and spell penetration. I rate spell penetration low here, as early on it's going to be important to heal yourself, and spell penetration only affects the damage that you deal and does not scale with any of your self-healing effects. Regeneration is a good example of this, as it is one of my most recommended early skills for a Magicka character, and it has no scaling with spell penetration. But it does scale with maximum magicka and spell damage. Every build needs supplementary stats which will increase the survivability and sustain. For Magicka DPS, survivability is going to come in the form of maximum health and resistances. I recommend having a minimum of 20k health for newer character builds. Magicka builds also need Magicka recovery and Magicka cost reduction in order to consistently sustain the damage rotation that we discussed in day 1.3. Stamina DPS is a similar story to Magicka DPS, with weapon damage and crit in place of spell damage and crit, as well as physical penetration and maximum stamina in place of spell penetration and maximum magicka. Stamina DPS still need to hit the 20k health threshold, they still benefit from resistances, and stamina DPS still requires stamina recovery and cost reduction in order to sustain. For healers, they are similar to Magicka DPS, except with a higher value placed on sustain, as if a healer runs out of magicka, they won't be able to heal the group anymore, and since they don't need to prioritize damage as much, they don't have as high of a need for spell penetration. Healers should also hit the 20k health threshold and look to include resistances in their build when possible. For tanks, their priority is going to be on survivability and sustain, and so they will prioritize max health, max magicka, and max stamina. I recommend 30k health minimum, 20k stamina, and then 15 to 20k magicka if possible after meeting the first two criteria. Tanks will want resistances and magicka recovery. Stamina recovery is very low priority as you don't recover stamina when you block, making the stat useless in dangerous situations, which dangerous situations is where our stats matter the most. Worth noting is that while stamina recovery is bad, stamina cost reduction is quite good, as is magicka cost reduction. So now that we've discussed gear slots, gear characteristics, and what stats are valuable to what classes, let's look at the armor passives to see what types of armor will work best for what builds. There are 3 types of armor in ESO: light, medium, and heavy. Each of the armor skill lines provides an active ability and 5 passives. The active ability and certain passives will only be available when 5 or more pieces of the armor type are being worn. In the case of light armor, the active ability Annulment is a ward which will shield your character from incoming damage. The first passive reduces snare effectiveness on your character per light armor piece equipped. The second increases magicka recovery and provides magicka cost reduction per piece. The third provides spell resistances per piece. The fourth provides a large amount of spell critical and requires a minimum of 5 light armor pieces to become active. And lastly, the fifth provides spell penetration and also requires 5 pieces to be active. We can already see how light armor would be desirable to magicka DPS and healers based on the magicka recovery, magicka cost reduction, spell critical, and spell penetration provided by the passives. For medium armor, the active ability Evasion provides 25% damage reduction from area of effect abilities. The first passive increases weapon critical rating for each piece of medium armor equipped. The second passive increases stamina recovery and provides stamina cost reduction per piece. The third provides bonuses to sneaking per piece. The fourth provides weapon damage and requires 5 or more pieces of medium armor to be equipped. The fifth passive increases movement speed and reduces the cost of roll dodge per medium armor piece equipped. Due to the stamina sustain, weapon crit, and weapon damage, medium armor is perfect for stamina DPS. Lastly, in the case of heavy armor, the active ability provides immunity to crowd control effects and provides resistances. The first passive increases physical and spell resistance per heavy armor piece equipped. The second provides health recovery per piece. The third provides maximum health. The fourth requires at least 5 pieces of heavy armor and increases the stamina and magicka return from heavy attacks. And the fifth also requires 5 pieces and increases healing received. Based on the resistances, passive sustain, health, and healing received, heavy armor is perfect for tanks. In summary, knowing what stats are valuable to our character and knowing what the passives of each armor type provide can indicate that light armor passives would be very useful to magicka DPS and healers, medium armor would be useful to stamina DPS, and heavy armor would be useful to tanks. In order to look up the different sets in ESO, I recommend going online and keeping in mind the stats your character wants to incorporate, as well as the armor type they will want to wear. I used en.uesp.net to find gear during my playthrough. I recommend focusing on overland base game sets from your starter region or a nearby region, but dungeon sets can also be considered. Typically, each region and dungeon will have a light, medium, and heavy armor set associated with it. Make sure to spend some time determining the sets you want, as determining the sets will take a lot less time than actually farming the sets, so it is best to make sure you are farming sets that you 100% want. You can look at sets from PvP, crafting, and from trials, but in my opinion, attaining them is either unrealistic or unenjoyable as a new player. Once you know what sets you want to try and attain, it is time to farm. Farming overland sets can be done by killing world bosses, delve bosses, public dungeon bosses, and from completing dolmens. Each of these sources will provide gear for different slots. Delve bosses will drop waist and feet pieces. World bosses will drop head, chest, leg, or weapon pieces. Public dungeon bosses will drop shoulder, hand, or weapon pieces. Lastly, dolmens will drop jewelry pieces. Chests found within a region have a chance to drop any piece of the region's sets. All of the gear found from these sources will be bind on equip. What this means is that the gear is not bound to your account until it is equipped, which means that you can trade it to other players or other players can trade it to you as long as it isn't equipped by a character at some point. Dungeon gear is dropped from dungeon bosses. Minor bosses will drop hand, waist, or feet pieces. Major bosses will drop chest, shoulder, head, and leg pieces. The final boss will drop jewelry or weapon pieces. In addition, there will always be 2 chests within a dungeon that can drop any piece of gear from the dungeon's loot table. Gear from dungeons is bind on pickup, meaning as soon as a character picks up that gear, it is bound to their account. It is worth noting that the gear can be traded to a group member who was in the dungeon when the gear was picked up. There is a 2-hour timer on this, so make sure to trade any gear within that time. Other methods of attaining gear are PvP, crafting, and trials. PvP and crafting are possible at this stage, but not recommended, as crafting requires a lot of trait research and PvP typically requires gear already in order to attain PvP gear. If you choose to PvP at this time, I recommend Battlegrounds as it has a match rating system and will try to place you against players of similar skill. Trials are an unreasonable area to farm gear as it will be hard, if not impossible, to find groups taking players lower than champ rank 160. A final point to talk about for early game builds is the food and Mundus buffs to run on your character. Food buffs can be very powerful and add a lot of combat capability to your character. For damage dealers and healers, I recommend using food that buffs both your health and primary resource, which would be Magicka for Magicka DPS and healers, and Stamina for Stamina DPS. For tanks, I recommend using either health food or tri-stat food, which buffs all 3 of your resources. Tri-stat food can be hard to find recipes for, so health food is fine when no tri-stat is available. Mundus stones are large stones located throughout Tamriel. Activating a Mundus provides a statistical buff to your character until another Mundus is selected. I recommend the Recovery Mundus early on as it is the most flexible and has value in every situation. This is the Atronach Stone for Magicka DPS, healers, and tanks, and the Serpent Stone for Stamina DPS. A few honorable mentions are the Damage Stones and Max Resource Stones, which are Apprentice and Mage respectively for Magicka DPS, and Warrior and Tower for Stamina DPS. Healers can also use the Ritual Stone, which increases healing done, and tanks can use the Lady or Lord for more resistances or health respectively. In the case of Valentine South, the character featured in this series, she is going to be farming 2 sets, both dropping Glenumbra, which was her starter region on the mainland. The first of which will be Bloodthorn's Touch, a set which grants spell damage, max Magicka, Magicka recovery, and a 5-piece that gives Magicka and stamina back upon dealing direct damage. The second set will be Weirdtree's Blessing, a set which grants Magicka recovery, spell damage, more Magicka recovery, and a 5-piece that cleanses negative effects when using Magicka abilities. As Bloodthorn's Touch is a light armor set, I plan to equip 5 of these armor pieces on the body to gain all of the light armor passives. This leaves 2 body slots open, the weapon slots, and the jewelry slots available for Weirdtree's Blessing. As Weirdtree is a heavy armor set with healthy jewelry, I plan to equip a heavy chest and legs of Weirdtree, and then have 3 jewelry pieces. Firstly, this will allow Valentine to consistently replace her weapons as she finds higher levels while exploring, making her damage stay scaled with her level. Second, the healthy jewelry will allow her to hit the 20k minimum health goal. Lastly, it also allows her to get the most benefit from the chest and leg armor bonuses by having heavy armor in those positions. The characteristics of this build are high sustain from the Magicka recovery bonuses and the 5-piece of Bloodthorn, high survivability from the healthy jewelry and the cleanse effect from Weird Tree, moderate damage from the spell damage and Max Magicka, and high flexibility as the build will have lots of traits from DPSing, healing, and tanking depending on what the action bars are. As Bloodthorn and Weird Tree are only 10 of the 12 gear slots, there is a chance I will craft my own weapons in Torg's Pact. Since I will make staves and staves provide 2 pieces towards a set bonus, I will be able to have the 2 piece of Torg's active. The Torg's 2 piece is spell damage, which is perfect for a Magicka DPS build. And since I am crafting my own staves, I can pick the trait and the level of the weapons. Torg's only requires 3 traits in order to craft, and so it is accessible very early on if you are consistently researching. That's all I had for today. Thanks for tuning in, and I will catch you in the next video, which will be the start of day 2 in the series.